So now we turn our attention to this. We have thousands of U.S. service members, Army, 82nd Airborne on their way, the Air Force, Marines, Navy, all headed to the Middle East. Many thousands are already there. So President Trump is telling Iran at this point to get serious about negotiations, quote, before it's too late. So here's what Iran could be facing in what's being described as a, quote, final blow scenario, an overwhelming military force in order to get Iran essentially to come to its knees in this standoff. So the global economy obviously needs the Strait not to be controlled, not to be squeezed off ever by Iran. So this kind of military offensive would need to establish freedom of the seas in the Strait for all of the countries that use it. Now, it could involve taking or potentially blocking some of these islands that you see in the waterway, starting with Abu Musa, which is a small island at the western entrance of the Strait, and you're going to see that in just a second. The UAE, a key ally, says that Abu Musa is their island. Iran claims that it belongs to them, but it's a crucial gatekeeper spot in the middle of the Persian Gulf. There's also Larak Island, which is loaded with Iranian military infrastructure. It's capable of targeting passing ships that go through. Here's Larak Island. So this is a place where they are able to have a lot of military infrastructure that can shoot at boats that are going through the Strait. So obviously that's an area that would need to be cleared out as well. Karg Island, which we've talked about a lot, is the main oil export hub. 90% of all their exports go through there. There was an initial hit on Karg Island, but there are targets that still exist there that are more crucial to the pipelines and the military infrastructure, oil infrastructure, I should say, on Karg Island. So that would also sound like it's on the list. Then there's the question of this 900 pounds of highly enriched uranium, which is said to be buried under Isfahan from the June attacks that we watched. So there is a potential for a ground operation to secure that material, or essentially the other option that appears to be on the table would be an air campaign that would render it useless. All of that is said to be potentially on the table if there is a final blow scenario by the U.S. military. Watch.
Can the Strait be reopened without the use of troops on the ground, boots on the ground by part of the
That's
US?
a tactical military question. I'm not going to, speculate on what it would take. It can be open tomorrow if Iran stops threatening global shipping, which is an outrage and a violation of international law for all these countries that care about international law. They should be doing something about it.
So joining me now, retired U.S. Navy intelligence officer Captain Todd Sawhill. He was over 25 years in the military, advising on the Middle East at CENTCOM, the Fifth Fleet, and Joint Staff Headquarters. Very good to have you with us, Captain. Thank you. What is your thought on this suggestion as we move all of these resources to the Gulf of a military large-scale action to do any of the things that we just discussed at the map?
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Martha. I think the biggest thing to talk about is anything that we try to do from a military planning perspective is to give the president or the person who's in charge making the decisions as many options as possible. So in this case, we know that the enriched uranium that's at Isfahan and potentially some of the other locations is secure and underground. But unless Iran willingly gives it to us, we may have to look at options to try and retain it, get it, and then exfil it from the country. Additionally, looking at options in the Strait of Hormuz, like you mentioned, Larak Island, Keshem Island, which is close to it, and 3 disputed islands, actually, Greater and Lesser Toom and Abu Musa, both disputed by Iran and UAE since 1971, provide additional options to look for ways to potentially hold them at risk or force the Strait open if the president chooses that's what he wants to do based on his risk calculus.
So we hear from CENTCOM about an extraordinary number of successful attacks and targets that have been hit in the region. We do still see that Iran, as I said before, has put pretty much every ounce of energy and money into their military. They haven't done anything to help their economy or the people of Iran at all. They basically are all about protecting the regime. What's your assessment of the military situation right now? How much do they have left?
Based on what I know, I think we've done significant damage to the missile program designed to hold people at risk throughout the region. And as we've seen over the last 48 hours, with the capacity to hold people at risk beyond Southwest Asia, so all the way to Diego Garcia and in certain cases into Europe. I think that's been significantly degraded, particularly that and the drone threat that holds the bases and our partners at risk. I think one of the things that still remains, despite the damage that's been done to the naval program or the naval forces, is the IRGC-N. Conservatively, going into this conflict, there were estimated between 1,000 and 2,000 small boats which are able to carry explosive warheads at the beginning, rockets and small arms, as well as 150 to 200 other boats that are able to carry torpedoes, explosive boats, or ASCMs, anti-ship cruise missiles. So there's still a threat there, and Iran could choose to use it. Right now they haven't, and we've continued to roll it back based on localized air superiority and in the Strait of Hormuz, as you can see and that y'all have reported. The A-10s, the AH-64s, and other assets pretty much have free reign in the airspace right now to continue to degrade that and roll that back to set the conditions for whatever those options the president may want to do.
So when you hear Steve Witkoff discuss these 15 items on the list of what they hope Iran will concede to, what goes through your mind in terms of how Iran looks at this list and what's at stake for them?
I look at Iran's list and I look at our list, and I don't see that we're not even in the same ballpark. We're in different area codes in this case. So I don't know what it's going to take to get Iran to the table and acquiesce to some of the demands that we are trying to bring in order to have cessation of this conflict. Right now, I think we're going to have to see Iran views this as total war, and we are viewing this many ways as a limited war. Now, we could move that if the president or the decision makers say this is what the risk of this object is going to be. But as of right now, we still stay with the limited objectives of getting rid of their power projection capabilities through their missiles, diminishing their capacity to have a nuclear weapon, and their maritime power projection capability, at least for right now.
So it sounds like the Gulf states want to see this through because the Pandora's box has been opened here. And they don't want this to end, according to a lot of reporting, unless we really do have freedom of the seas through the straits guaranteed.
I agree. I believe that the Gulf states really want to see this end on terms that are favorable to them. One of the things that really caught my attention on Iran's list of demands was to have sovereignty of the Strait of Hormuz. Yes. Well, if you look at where the traffic separation scheme is, that alone is in Omani territorial water. So obviously the GCC states have significant stake in this game, and they're going to want to see it brought to a conclusion that allows them to continue to have freedom of navigation, freedom of maneuver, and the economic freedom to continue to export what they need to the global economy.
Do you see Iran engaging in asymmetric warfare? Because obviously they have, a very different sort of viewpoint of the world, and survival, just surviving, is what will be a win for them, potentially.
I completely agree. I think one of the things that we've always looked at when it came to Iranian planning for the last 20 to 30 years is regime survival to them is paramount. And they'll do anything they can once they feel the pressure is completely on them to allow for that survival to be there. Like I said, they're looking at through the lens of total war and not so much limited war. Mm-hmm. Now, the Iranian population, 80 to 90% of them, are the kind of people that don't want this regime to have the power that they do. But the fact of the matter is they do have it. So what we have to do is try and set conditions to at least get us where we have diminished capability for them to hold this global economic choke point at risk, and then eventually get to a point where the threat of a nuclear weapon is not there, and the GCC partners and their economic freedom of maneuver is also there as well.
Well, it seems like those things are more in reach now than they were several weeks ago. And we'll see where this goes from here. Captain Todd Sawhill, thank you very much. Good to have you with us, sir.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.